Good evening. My name is Kelly Greenlee. I am the Community Outreach Librarian at Prince Memorial Library. Prince Memorial Library serves Cumberland and North Yarmouth, and we are very happy to have such a wide audience today. This particular learning event is brought to you by, as part of something that we're calling MeCollab. It's a new word in the library world. We've created our own world, our own word. So MeCollab is a Maine library collaborative that brings shared learning events to people in Maine. It's very simple. It's libraries teaming up to bring more diverse programming to the people throughout Maine. So MeCollab just stands for Maine Collaborative. Libraries that are participating in tonight's program are Prince Memorial Library, that's my library, Falmouth Memorial Library, Scarborough Public Library, and Thomas Memorial Library. So we're very happy to have them aboard. And if you're part of those libraries or part of another library in Maine, welcome. We're glad to have you. So artificial intelligence seems to be the buzzword these days. I don't think I go through a day without hearing the word and hearing reference to the words. And sometimes I want to bury my head in a hole and pretend it's not right here on my doorstep, but it is. So that's why we're here, and that's why I am going to introduce you to our speaker this evening. Dr. Raj Saha is a research manager at the New York Times and a lecturer in data science and AI at the Roux Institute at Northeastern University. He is passionate about the democratization of data and technology and how they could be thoughtfully utilized toward building a better and more sustainable world. Raj, thanks for coming tonight.
Thanks, Kelly. Appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk about AI. This is something that I'm very passionate about and how we use, and I also am lucky enough to be using it on a day-to-day basis, every day, both in my work and outside of work. So I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen over here. I have a set of slides that I'll go through over here. And I have purposely kept um, most of statistics and data and technicalities out of this as much as possible. And my hope is that there's going to be leading questions and that gets us thinking along some of the important questions that we as a society haven't are still coming to terms with. So yeah, this talks about what is AI. That's the first part, and the second part is everything around it, the ethics, the guardianship, responsibilities, how we use it for good. Um, I should also say that many of the images that you're going to see in this presentation were actually generated by AI. Many, but not all. And I should also add that all the diagrams, anything that's a diagram of information or systems, or any kind of text, those are all generated by me. Just a little bit about my background. I was trained as a climate scientist, really. That was my PhD. I studied climate. I modeled the climate of our planet in the past. I modeled how the Indian monsoons work. And over time, my interests sort of spread out from the climate modeling aspect to more diverse contexts. I've done some work on epidemiology and how diseases spread in networks, how they used to result in outbreaks in the past before the pre-vaccination era. I also worked a little bit in biology and studying bioluminescence, how animals use light, like fireflies or marine ostracods, how they use luminescence to communicate with one another, which is also a form of intelligence that we will talk about later today. I spent some time working at a startup on carbon sequestration. That kind of took out a lot of my hopes, sort of naive hopes, I should say, on how much technology can actually solve some of the most pressing problems of the world and what it claims. So yeah, after that, I took on a role of research manager at the New York Times. And what I do here at the New York Times, I make models of user behaviors based on their readings and what how their behaviors can change in the future and how we can make products and make their experience better. So with that, I'm going to jump into part one of this talk, which is what is AI? Let's just understand what AI is and uh, what kind of terms and definitions we should be aware of. Very fundamentally, AI is something that we have all used, and it really involves just pattern recognition. So you have data, and data could be any kinds of data, with numbers or with text, and it's about finding patterns or connections within the data. And if any of you have ever done a regression of X and Y, a linear regression, so to speak, you have used a machine learning model. And machine learning models are, subset of AI. Um, so the modern machine learning tools that are out there, the modern AI tools that are out there, are essentially just much, much more sophisticated versions of this linear regression model that I have a picture of in front that most of you might be familiar with, right? It's just taking place with a lot of data, and it's taking place in many more contexts and many more dimensionalities. But essentially, it is pattern recognition. Um, Another way of looking at this, if we step outside of numbers and go into the language world, AI is a statistical representation of the past, sometimes what we call in the field priors. So you could train an AI, presumably just as well as you could train a human, to study a book or some text like Shakespeare or anything, all the text that's there on the internet, and then learn from there, and then come up with a way to predict what comes next. So here's an example of how an AI might internally work. If you give it this sentence, a quick brown fox jumped over and you stopped over there, and you asked it to predict what the next possible words or phrases might be, it will do an internal computation. It will scan through its learned database and its training, and it will come up with some kind of statistical probabilities of what the next likely words or phrases are. And in this case, it will internally create some kind of a measure. And I've just sort of schematically shown what that could be. It would get a bunch of outcomes that could come after a quick brown fox jumped over and some of those options could be lazy dog, lazy cat, lazy mouse, busy mouse, danger mouse. You can make them all up. And it will assign the highest probability to a word or phrase that it has seen in the past. And that's something that it's going to suggest. Now, this does not require, as you might guess, this does not require sentience on the part of AI. It just requires learning patterns in the past. So essentially, all of AI, everything that we have today, falls under these two basic functions that it does. Next, maybe we should talk about what is intelligence, particularly in a biological context, because that is the only context in which we know of intelligence, that we are familiar with intelligence. And from what we have seen in biology and from what we know about our human intelligence, we understand that to be an evolutionarily emergent computational process that takes place in neurons or some other connected networks of information exchange. It's a computational process for solving problems that pertain to the survival of the organism, that help it pass its genes down to future generations, And additionally, and maybe even included in the first two, aspects of creativity that we mainly see in humans, possibly also in other organisms. Dolphins and elephants, they've all been said to demonstrate creativity. Um, Again, it is just as hard to define creativity as, or maybe it is harder to define intelligence than it is to define creativity. Um, but that's the only context in which we know of these, in a biological context. So the question that we could ask now is biology a necessary condition for intelligence? Do we need neurons, biological neurons, um, to be able to have intelligence of any sort? Could intelligence exist in a circuit that's made up of silicon? Could intelligence exist in a quantum computer? These are questions we could ask, and there's no clear consensus on this. I would say most researchers, philosophers, they would lean towards believing that um, biology is not necessary, but we don't really have hard evidence for that yet. It's just something that we can guess to be true, and for good reason. I also happen to believe that intelligence is not just limited to biological systems. So what are the kinds of intelligence that we are aware of in the animal kingdom, and in AI as we see today? So first is we can break this into three broad categories. We can call it narrow intelligence, which is where an organism is able to solve a particular very narrow set of tasks, and it gets really good at solving those narrow set of tasks. So slime mold, for example, they're really good at solving mazes and finding paths around obstacles and finding food, and they build these really efficient networks that is computationally, like if we were to do this by hand with math, would be a tremendously a difficult job to do. So the picture I have over here is a picture of the cities around Tokyo. And city planners, engineers, they were trying to come up with what's the best possible route of railroad networks from Tokyo and going out to these cities outside. That'll be the most efficient in terms of transporting people, in terms of the length of tracks and so on. And this is a very hard problem. It in fact falls in a class of problems that are almost impossible to solve um, computationally, as in using our own intelligence. So some of these researchers, what they did is they placed a map. They placed a smaller version of the map of Tokyo and its surroundings, and they placed little drops of food, maybe sugar, in those places where cities are located, where they would want to build stops. And they placed a bunch of spores right in Tokyo, and then they let that network grow over time. And so over time, the slime mold network built a very efficient system that we would have a hard time computing, that we would have a hard time building. And this network, if you look at this network of paths laid out by the slime mold, and they're basically trying to find paths, shortest paths to all the food that there is. This is a very good solution to say any kind of network that we might want to build. So slime mold has this innate capacity to solve these kinds of problems, yet they actually do not have any neuronal structures. Slime mold, they have a life where they spend part of their lives as unicellular organisms. They just roam around the forest floor or surfaces, and when food gets scarce, they all clump together, and then they become what's called a multicellular slug, and then collectively they move around and they find food. So there's this intelligence that we can observe as a swarm or as many slime mold get together. There's information being exchanged between them. We don't fully understand how, but yet, and because of that, they're able to solve some problems, a very narrow set of problems. Ants also do something very similar. Individual ants on their own, not so much, but ant colonies as a whole, they are able to build these really intricate structures where they bring in the food that they cannot digest, like leaves, blades of grass. They cut them down and they bring it down into these chambers where they grow particular species of fungi. And these fungi will eat those, the cellulose, and the ants in turn feed on the fungi. So they're essentially the oldest farmers in the world. They build these structures in which particular species of fungi can grow, and they farm them very efficiently. Again, another example of intelligence. Now, ants do have something similar to brains, very simple brains, but this really is a result of the whole colony of ants, hundreds, thousands, millions of them working together. AI today is actually very good at narrow intelligence. Some AI, if not most AI systems, can solve some very specialized tasks better and faster than any human can. And in fact, I should come to this later. So the picture I have over here is one generated by AI, and it's I'm building paper clips. And you may be familiar with this analogy that researchers often talk about giving an AI, a super intelligent, super powerful AI, this task of making as many paper clips as possible, and then the AI completely loses the context and ends up using all of the resources in the world to make paper clips. Anyway, that's a side topic. So we have for a few years now, we have AI that can beat the best humans at strategy games, things that we actually maybe a decade or two ago thought was not possible. So in 1997, I believe, IBM made Deep Blue, which beat Garry Kasparov at chess. Garry Kasparov was a world champion at chess. And just a few years ago, I think it was again IBM's AI that beat the world champion at Go, which was a much more complicated game than chess is. Again, things that we didn't think was possible even just a few decades ago. But this still falls under the scope of narrow intelligence, because the AI that could beat the world champion at chess will not be able to, say, suggest a recipe for you. If you give it some ingredients, it won't be able to do that. So it's very, very narrow in scope. But very recently, as of the last year or so, we have what we call large language models. Many of you may have heard of ChatGPT or Anthropic or Gemini. These are some of the newer variants coming out. These are different versions of large language models. Now, these models are somewhat at the frontier of narrow intelligence. Most of what they do or what they're used for still involve narrow intelligence, but they're evolving very, very rapidly. And some are already able to do a wide multitude of tasks, like analyze pictures, analyze sound, analyze text, answer deep questions in philosophy or whatnot. So it's starting to go beyond narrow intelligence. And it's a matter of, there's a lot of debate about when it might actually go over from narrow intelligence over to general intelligence, which is the next category. And this is the category that we put ourselves in, because we humans, we have this ability to solve complicated and unseen problems that we have never seen before, that we don't have any priors or any kind of prior statistical database to go to and see and look up how to solve these problems. But when presented with these kinds of unseen problems, we employ creativity to be able to solve these problems. This is certainly, Well, I would say certainly not the case now for AI. There are some people who might disagree with this for good reason. Um, um, so this is what's called general intelligence, and in the context of in the context of artificial intelligence, it's the term you might hear is uh, artificial general intelligence, and there's a race now um, amongst the leading AI companies to build AGI, and this AGI will be something that will have the capacity to solve problems just like humans do, but be better than most humans. Most humans, they probably won't be better than every human in every task, but most humans. And finally, even beyond general intelligence, researchers have defined this other idea of superintelligence. And this is where intelligence of any system, presumably not biological, artificial, this would be where AI can surpass human intelligence or general intelligence by many, many orders of magnitude. And the belief there is that if their intelligence goes even a little bit beyond human intelligence, they will quickly learn how to make themselves even smarter. And then there will be an exponential growth. And so they'll end up being many, many orders of magnitude um, more intelligent than us. And that is something that we truly cannot grasp what character these systems will take on when they have intelligence that's so beyond our ability to relate to. You can ask, when will we know if AI reaches such a state? We can set some benchmarks there. We can say that when these AI systems are able to discover new laws of nature, new laws that we have not found, that say if you think about physics, unifying quantum mechanics with general relativity, it's something that has been a very hard problem to solve. It's not been solved. We don't know how to do it. But if AI can come along and provide a solution, well, that will be an example, a tangible example of superintelligence. But really, we cannot say because we don't really have much of an idea to be able to relate to that idea of superintelligence. It's worthwhile also talking a little bit about how AI has progressed in time. And you can really go back much, much further. You can go back to the 1800s, but I'll start in the 1950s when the first electronic computers were made. In the 1950s, Alan Turing proposed the Turing test, which would be a test that a human takes, that a human administers an AI that claims to be intelligent, and the human, based on their answer, the human has to make a determination whether or not it's a sentient being or not, and whether or not the human can distinguish between a human response and an AI. So that was a Turing test. The term artificial intelligence actually goes back all the way to 1956 at a conference held in Dartmouth. And in 1958 was when the first model of a perceptron, the simplest possible neural network, was conceptualized. So 1958. So conceptually, neural networks as we have today, which is the foundational basis of AI systems, they have been around since that time for many years. The only reason they are so much in the news, that they're so much important now, is because we have a lot of computing power and we have a lot of data to use that computing power on. So you'll see that these are milestones essentially in the progression of AI. And there's long periods of gaps, and these are the so-called the first AI winter that happened between 1970 and 1980s, and then the second AI winter that happened in the 80s and 90s. And after that, there's been slow progression. 1997, IBM's Deep Blue defeats Garry Kasparov. In 2011, IBM's Watson wins Jeopardy. 2018, the first GPT models come out. And in 2020, we have ChatGPT. And here we are today. So the last part that I'll talk about here is really what brings us here. Why is there so much excitement and buzz about AI right now? And this really just goes back to a year ago when OpenAI launched ChatGPT. And in just a few days, the world was, I would say, in a new historical timeline. Like we enter a new timeline where there is this machine that can answer questions. So these are just some snapshots of questions that I've asked ChatGPT. The ChatGPT on the left, Claude AI on the right, which is also an equally good competitor. I've asked the question of what is the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything, and ChatGPT says 42. Some of you might get that reference. It's actually from Douglas Adams's book, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But if you didn't know the context and if you saw the answer, you might think, wow, what does that mean? Um, on the right, I have a screenshot where I ask Claude to summarize War and Peace in 50 words or less. It gives me an explanation. It's right about 50 words. And then I say, you can do better. And then it gives me a slightly different version of that same summary. So yeah, I've spent many hours talking with these AI systems. I do this every day. I do this for my work. I do this to aid in my teaching. I've really come to use it as an assistant, and it's definitely helped me learn a lot of things because I've tried to use it as a learning tool. And at the same time, it's raised a lot of questions in if I can do this, um, how much power can people who own the systems as completely unguarded, um, how much power could they possibly have? So these are some questions that I'd love to get into in part two. So that's about it for part one. I'll wait and see if there's questions.
I'm wondering if we are unduly influenced, and if our opinions and our perception of AI is influenced too much by Hollywood, or if it's pretty much right on par with where, is our thinking too influenced by what we see in Hollywood? You have the images of HAL from, what was it, 2001, A Space
2001, Space
Odyssey, right?
Odyssey. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just curious if Hollywood is an accurate depiction of where things are going, or
I mean, I haven't seen that many. I'm not a Hollywood expert, but I'll say that there's probably elements of truth in some aspects and the kinds of questions they raise. In The Matrix, for example, it raises some questions about what AI can do, and it's probably driven a lot of fears surrounding an AI that ends up controlling, um, taking control, taking over. And same with the 2001 Space Odyssey. But I think if you look in the Star Trek world, they had AI systems that were maybe a little bit more benevolent or more helpful to humans. So even Hollywood, just to my limited knowledge, has also seen an evolution in how AI is depicted, and no doubt that it's shaped our opinions and the conversations that we have around AI.
thank you. So we have a question from Josh Rubin. He says, thank you for this.
Hi, Josh.
He is wondering how researchers are thinking about the limits of creativity in AI and AGI with respect to, or in comparison to, human creativity.
Oh, that's that's important and difficult question. So let me repeat the question back so I understand. You're asking how researchers are thinking about creativity, um, limits of AI.
So yeah, so about the limits of creativity in AI and AGI with respect to or in comparison to human creativity.
Yeah, maybe I should just say that I do not know a whole lot about this specific question. But I will say what I do know is researchers have been studying um, what say the novelty or the newness of things that AI generates, say art, visual art, images. And what they have found is that um, AI reaches AI in its current state reaches a plateau very quickly um, because its source of learning is, although it is vast, it is still limited. And now the concern there is, in order to be able to keep feeding the AI new training material, you might inadvertently or purposely be providing it with images that it itself generated. And then it enters this feedback loop of um, producing producing objects, if you will, and then learning from those objects, and that makes them degenerate over time. And this is something that researchers have investigated, and this is actually a big worry because AI systems as they are today, they have almost run out of data. If not, they have fully run out of data to learn from. Um, so that there's definitely a limit. And why does this limit exist? Why is it that why is it that it is plateaued out? Because I think it just goes back to that first question of statistical a question of what is AI, in that in its current form, it is essentially a statistical representation of the past. So it might bring you an image when you go to Midjourney and when you say, give me an image of I'll actually use a reference. The prompt that I gave to generate this image was give me a New Yorker style cartoon of a humanoid AI building paper clips in a factory. So it went in its corpus and it looked for images of humanoid AIs and paper clips and factories. And this actually does not quite look like a factory. And it put it together. It got some notion of what the styles were in the New Yorker style cartoons, and it put them together so that it put them together in this collage, if you will, that might seem new to us, but all the elements in those pieces were were completely new. Now, what will be really crazy is if you can ask AI to uh, give me an image of some character or some description, and then it does something like what Jackson Pollock did or what Mondrian did, just something completely new and just completely not done before. Um, that is something that there's been no demonstration that AI does now. Um, so hopefully that addresses a
Yeah,
small.
so I have a related question from Polly. She's wondering if does AI have imagination?
Well, some people will say yes, some people will say no. I will probably say no. But also, you'd have to ask, well, what is imagination? Is it an internal monologue? Um, because if that is all it is, not all humans are said to have internal monologues. And in fact, if you say, okay, maybe it's not internal monologues in words and language, but maybe it's just pictures. Well, some people cannot visualize internally. So is it one or the other? Is it one and the other? Is it neither? It is actually really hard to define imagination. As far as we know, AI systems today, they are not aware of what they're producing. As in, they cannot look back on their systems and understand what it is solving. It is just a box where data is coming in from one end and output is coming in from the other end. And it's a complicated processing that's going on in between. But as far as we know, they're not aware. and um, and I'm not sure that we know that awareness is even necessary for imagination. I mean, again, our context is all human, right? I mean, we imagine and we know that we imagine. Um, are there built-in systems for AI to know what they're doing? Not currently, but it's not inconceivable that they cannot at some point if we intention it that way.
One more question for now. What are the most important current commercial applications of AI?
Oh, that's hard to say. Well, I can most likely it is advertising. AI, and by current, I should say it's been what AI has mostly been used for um, up until now. So up until now, the correct answer is advertising. So anytime you go to a website, anytime you go on Facebook or any kind of social media platform, anything to do with the internet, you get ads, and these ads are personalized to you in term based on your habits on the internet. And this is where most of the money has gone into the development of AI to be able to generate ads. Now, from where we are and into the future, there's a lot of potential talks about, oh, we are going to now use AI to solve disease. We're going to use AI to stop aging and to solve climate change, to make to eradicate world hunger and everything else. Um, take out carbon from the atmosphere and solve climate change and all of those things, right? So there's a lot of hypotheticals, but the truth so far has been advertising, sadly.
Sorry, I am going to let you go on to the part two, but somebody did ask a clarification question. Sally asks, can you elaborate on your comment that AI has almost run out of new data to draw from?
Yeah. So these large language models, they have been trained on almost all the text that exists on the internet. And this includes all published books. Um, Hopefully, we don't know yet. Hopefully, at least they were open under open public license. Um, anything that is basically publicly available online has been accessed and used by AI to train itself, to train the models. And the rate at which AI is reading all the existing data is much, much faster than the rate at which data is being produced. So it has already reached very quickly in just a few years. It has read the whole collected um, intellectual work that we humans have produced in our entire history. In just a few years, it has read all of it.
So does it start feeding itself now, new information?
Well, that's a real worry. That's a real
Yeah.
worry that it will start feeding itself new material that's now put on the internet with the help of AI. So there's a lot of work that's being done to put metadata on AI generated images, for example, or text, to make sure that AI doesn't read and learn from its own output. But you require regulations for that. You require some kind of consensus to make that happen. And not everybody is going to play by those rules.
Right. Well, we do have a few more questions in the chat, but I'm going to wait till the end to perhaps address those. Although we do have somebody who would like you to um, uh, break down different types of artificial intelligence, and maybe you're getting to that, machine learning, deep learning, etc. I'll just throw that out there, and then I'm going to leave you to the second part of your presentation.
Yeah, I'll go back to this first slide here. So AI is the broader umbrella, and machine learning models are a subset of AI. And machine learning models are more complicated versions of this linear regression model that you can make in Excel. If you were to have a bunch of points and you were to find a line of best fit, that's a machine learning model. If you do this in many dimensions, it becomes a machine learning. It just becomes a little bit more complicated. And there's many different machine learning models out there to do specialized tasks with data. And these involves mostly statistical techniques, and in fact, statistical concepts like mean, median, mode, those kinds of ideas. Then you have neural networks, and neural networks also produce the same output, but the way they work is a little bit different. They work by with the implementation of an artificial neural network, which is where you have several inputs, well, one input and one output, and in between you have layers of computation where the input gets transformed one layer at a time, and then it finally gets processed out as output. And that sort of mimics in how biological neurons work. And those are your deep learning models. And then you have large language models, which are actually a mix of deep learning models and your standard statistical machine learning models.
Excellent, thank you. So off you go, part 2. I'll be quiet now.
Yeah, so in this part, I'd like to talk about the ethics, guardianship, responsibilities, and potentials of AI. So one thing we have to accept is that AI is unlike any past technology. And this is important because, say, anytime there are questions that come up, say, about the ownership and control of AI systems, or what AI is going to do to labor, for example, people, and by people I mean mostly the owners of these technologies, they will say that, look, cars came out at some point and they displaced the horse drivers, or whatever you call them. And likewise, every new technological step that we have taken have in some ways transformed the existing way of doing things, and therefore have shifted the labor market. The difference is that for AI, this is happening at a rate that we have never seen before. When cars came around, it didn't happen in 1 year or 2 years. There was a period of time over which this transition took place. And now, this is happening almost instantly at a blink of an eye, and so much so that we don't really have a way to grasp it. And it is taking over, and it becomes relevant in almost every aspect of our society. And it's happening all at once, very, very quickly. So this is how AI technology is fundamentally different from any previous technology, is because it replaces, or it aims to replace human intellect. So let's break down some of the issues that are there with AI systems. Currently, the AI systems we have, they require massive amounts of resources to run. We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars to run and to train these models. And therefore, they are owned mostly by private entities at this point. So OpenAI, most famously, they started out as being open, that they would have their technology be open to the world. But it turns out that over the course of their development, they are actually not very open. They have a profit side as well. They are closed to some extent. Yes, we do get to use ChatGPT, but they have shareholders, and the shareholders expect some return for their investment. And it is, I think, completely fair to assume that the version of ChatGPT that we get to use, that we get to interact with, is not the same version that those who have invested hundreds of billions of dollars will get to see and profit from. Another issue is that it used to be that in the early days of the internet, which was yesterday only, the consumer, we had consumers. We would use data to buy actual products. But now we, the consumer, have become the product. We make the data products for the AI systems. And then they use that to market, to feed us advertisements that we then follow to go and spend our money on. So we are now really the data producers. If you're wondering why Facebook is free to use, it's because, well, you are giving Facebook a lot of data to work from. And ultimately, there's not a whole lot of control over who owns this data, really. Do you own the data? Does a company own the data? Who gets to profit from it? These are not very clear as of now. There's a fear that AI, well, there's a lot of hype that AI will have all AI assistants. In fact, I'll say I use AI as an assistant, but there's also fear that AI will replace me or people, not necessarily me, but AI can replace a lot of people in the jobs that they do today. So we have to be a little bit skeptical of this hype. Are we really getting AI assistants, or are we getting replacements? This image, for example, I made this image with Midjourney, and the prompt was give me a picture of a middle-aged man talking to an AI after he has lost his job, and make it in the style of Norman Rockwell painting. And this is what I got. So I leave it up to you to say if this was creative or not. It's certainly really good. If a human painted this, I will say, wow, that is really great. But I'll leave that to you to decide if this is creative work or not. So are we now starting to replace artists? Or will be the meaning of creativity if we use these tools? Questions we have to ask. So this is Mustafa Suleyman, who is the co-founder of Google's DeepMind. He recently said in an interview that AI is fundamentally a labor replacing tool. And he was dead serious about it. The reason why there are companies now racing towards building better AI systems is so now you can have AI that can replace software engineers. So we can have, and you only have to pay these software engineers, these AI software engineers once. You have to just pay their owners. Maybe there's going to be subscription models and so on, but you don't have to pay for their healthcare. You don't have to worry about interpersonal issues. You don't have to worry about their well-being. So it's fundamentally also a very lucrative idea to just have AI do all the work that humans are currently doing. When you talk about responsibility, there's, I'd say, two broad kinds that we can talk about. We can talk about legal responsibility. So who takes the responsibility when AI makes mistakes? So you have a self-driving car, and the self-driving car runs over people and kills people. It has actually happened. So in those cases, who takes the responsibility? And what's the framework around that? We don't really have those frameworks set up yet. And the other part of the responsibility is environmental. As of today, AI needs massive amounts of water for cooling. It's computers, and there's a lot of evaporation, water loss taking place. And this is particularly bad because around the world, the groundwater supplies are being depleted. And this is also a time when we have a massive need for AI to use water. We don't really know how to go around this yet. But somebody has to take responsibility for this, and there has to be a cost for these externalities that come about. Yes, this is human agency, right? So if AI starts making art that can pass as art, then what is our role now? There's already AI programs out there that can make music. Will Spotify just become a place where you say, I want to hear music that's in some style and nostalgic of some era or in some particular artist style. I want to hear a song about such and such idea, and then the AI makes a new song for you, and that's what you listen to. It's not, it's just the audio version of Midjourney where you go and you put in a prompt and say, hey, give me an image of this. So this picture that I have over here is actually a picture I generated and submitted to an art contest, and it got selected. I was clear that how it got generated, but it was a juried show about the effect of the title was something like time and temperature, and I asked the AI to give me a painting in a hard edge abstract style um, that shows part of downtown Portland being inundated in water because of sea level rise. And this is what it gave me. And I submitted this uh, to this juried art show, and it got accepted. Of course, I also said in my artist statement how the process in which I made it. I did also, I should say, I trained the AI with images that I had made. So it's not entirely AI, but it's also AI. It's also a little bit of me. So what do we call this? Is this an example of creative work? Or is it just a collage of ideas that AI has put together based on my work and based on the work of millions of other artists on the internet? So I'll leave that up to you. Um, so what we don't have right now are proper ways of incentivizing creative and innovative work. Um, we are mostly training these models, or we are providing data to these models, but um, there's no structure as such to incentivize actual creative work. Or rather, those structures that exist currently, they're going to be very quickly, probably very quickly, um, completely run over by AI systems that are making new things for you, like art, like music, anything else. um, so we should talk about what the possible versus likely scenarios are in terms of where we are and where we're likely to go. So a lot of the conversation that takes place around AI, they happen on two ends. On one end, the bad end, are ideas that AI is going to take over and destroy all of humanity, and we're going to go extinct. It's an existential problem. We have to be really, really worried about that. There's a lot of people, including very prominent people, a lot of people who own AI systems, they say that. And then there's another school of thought that says, well, AI is going to come along and they're going to help humans solve all of the big problems, solve climate change and everything else. So these are two extremes. There's a lot of other more plausible ideas that are in between. We could have where we are right now is that middle point is that we have good AI and bad AI, and there's a struggle to balance them. We don't really have any regulations um, around how we control these systems, and basically it comes down to controlling the humans who control these systems, because AI by itself is not doing anything. It's humans guiding them. Um, so we can be somewhere along this gradient of really bad to really good. But where could we be? I'm going to skip over these two slides. Well, maybe these are all images generated from AI. Here's a picture of the Pope. This caused quite a bit of stir maybe a year ago at this point. It looks very real, but it's completely fake. But you wouldn't be able to tell. So there's possible future paths for AI. Where we are currently, following the trend of where we are, that would be the thick blue line, where where we can expect to see massive labor disruptions. We could maybe expect to see some decline in creativity. Yes, some people like me are going to use AI to make new things. In fact, a lot of people will, but would that actually be enhancing our creativity? Would that actually be, making new Jackson Pollocks and Mondrians? We don't know. There's a scope for creating a lot of misinformation. Um, um, it has happened. It has had real consequences in just the last few years, and the scope for that in the future is even greater. There's a massive environmental cost potential, and there's also big concerns about appropriation of intellectual property on a massive scale, intellectual property of artists and creative people. So that's the track that we are currently on. Without any regulation, that's the path that we will go on, most likely. But there's the second most likely path is, in my view, is where it's a decent path, but with still some problems. We might be able to see um, improved healthcare because of AI, and those will probably only be accessible to some, not everybody. We could hope that there could be better environmental stewardship, that we're going to use AI to manage our resources and our consumption of resources better. We could maybe hope that AI can give us better governance through sharing of data between different parts of the government and the public, so the government can serve the public better. Um, but you'll have bad actors. And there's a balance. If you open up the technology, then it becomes accessible to everybody, then not everybody will play by the books. Um, and misinformation will also likely be a problem in this decent outcome. So where we are right now, we have to try our best to move upwards along that ladder. I mean, the best scenarios are so far away. It would just be great if we can land on the decent path, in my point of view, and inch towards the best. And those are steps that we have to take very intentionally and concretely. So I'll say, how do we summarize where you go from here? There's a lot that can be said. These are some of the points that come to me. These the first few points that came to me, and I wrote them down. First, we have to accept that AI cannot solve some of the most pressing problems that exist. We have to be really skeptical of the idea of techno-utopianism, that climate change and whatnot, and all of the problems that exist, technology and AI will come and solve those problems. We have to be very skeptical of these ideas. And they really just go back to who owns these technologies, what is in their interest. We have to educate ourselves and the younger generation about how AI works. We have to demystify this completely. Not in the sense of let's all learn how to use AI so we can get jobs, but more from the sense of how does it actually work? And maybe using that to understand ourselves a little bit better. We have to introduce new standards for copyright laws and intellectual property. Those currently are very poorly structured. Copyright lawyers will tell you that anytime there's in copyright cases, it is extremely hard to predict how the courts will decide. It's almost like a coin flip because there's no frameworks built around understanding intellectual property in this digital age. It was already hard before AI, and now it's insurmountably hard. We really have to work towards these. And there are governments and institutions that have some standards set already, like the GDPR, for example, in Europe. They have some standards set with regards to this, but it's not fully fleshed out. Neither is it perfect, but it's a starting point. We could be there. We need to run actual experiments, implementing some of the good scenarios that we envision of how AI can help enhance human well-being. So if we have AI doing all our hard work, then we ought to get more time to ourselves to do anything we want or nothing. Why don't we start implementing these ideas as experiments and start seeing how they work? Because AI by itself will not just do that. And if the ownership of AI is the way it is always, it's not that having an AI assistant is going to give you some time off. It will just mean that you're going to use that AI assistant to be more productive. That equation ought to be flipped. Um, And then we have to be really intentional about enhancing human connections. And this is something that is probably psychologists have been noticing for several years now, that this is on the decline. And you can probably attribute a lot of this to the online platforms that exist. People are becoming more and more distant from one another in their families or in their immediate social networks, in-person social networks. They're just being replaced by online platforms. So we have to be really intentional about enhancing human connections and human well-being. Something where we don't have to include AI. We could include AI, but it's a way for us to make sure that we don't fall down the rabbit hole of this techno-utopianism that AI claims to have. So that was it. That's all I have.
So I'm adding to a question in the chat. I'm going to change it slightly. So somebody asked whether AI is morality based, and I guess what I'm going to ask is it possible for it to be morality based as we move toward the future?
So then first we have to define morality and a universal code for morality. In principle, I don't see why AI cannot be morally based but we first have to agree what is moral and come up with those ground rules, and then we can tell the AI to operate by those guardrails. By itself, there is no AI systems will have no propensity or no it will not come up with morality on its own unless maybe we put it in specialized circumstances where it has to try out a bunch of different strategies for survival, and then it comes out with a moral strategy. Turns out, evolutionarily speaking, a bunch of the moral values that we have developed, there is a selfishness to that as well. As in, like, being good to others is ultimately also good for you. And these traits have survived in human culture because they have benefited us as individuals. So a lot of our moral code actually could go back to those evolutionary origins of survival. There, as of now, AI doesn't live in that context. But what it has learned a lot from the internet is also what we put there. So it has learned how we conceptualize and word morality. But I can't say that there's a desire on the part. It doesn't have any desire. AI won't be doing moral things on its own. We have to tell it to not do immoral things, but then we have to define what those immoral things are. The problem you run into is what is immoral for you could be just fine for somebody else.
So Sally asks, I am aware of how algorithms are being used in social media to selectively feed us certain types of information. Does this come into play in AI also? Who determines what information AI accesses to produce its answer?
There's engineers and executives in your social media company that um, sat down over many meetings, and they discussed what aspects of your digital life's information they will use to target you with ads. And these are deliberately thought out decisions. So anytime you're on the internet, there are these things called cookies that track your activity, and it's there really to help you out, but it's also um, uh, uh, a repository of and a history of all your actions on the internet. And depending on the AI platform, they will have access to some of that, not all of it, some of that, and some of that will be in their end user license agreement. You will, by choosing to use Facebook, you agree in principle, to let AI, to let the Facebook AI models, and by AI over here, I mean AI in the current context, not in a sentient context. Um, by agreeing to use Facebook or any other social platform, you are giving them permission to use that data to feed you those ads. Now, that is the case here in the US. In Europe, where the laws are a little bit stricter, you can actually opt out of a lot of the data that companies can use to target you with ads. You can say, no, do not use data about me at all, my data at all, or you may use only these aspects of my personal data and not others. So those structures exist, just not here in the US.
So we have time for one more question, and I think this is a great one to end on. Michael asks, can AI ever help us to answer the question of what it means to be a human being?
Well, maybe if we have a super intelligent AI, we can ask it a question like, what is the, answer to being a human? And maybe will just tell us. But it's also likely that if it tells us something and we already don't know it, we won't understand it. Um, so that's a possibility, maybe. Um, what I actually find something very hopeful about the place where we are at currently, which is this. There's a picture of a parrot here, and this is because this researcher called David Krakauer, who's at the Santa Fe Institute, he calls these large language models, he gives them the name of parrot intelligence. So they're able to parrot out um, words without actually understanding things. I disagree somewhat. There are other people also who disagree with that. I do think that they understand concepts in the way we understand concepts, even though they're not sentient. Um, but I think that where I see this to be a hopeful place to be is we can actually use that little bit of understanding that the large language models have now to be able to not ask it directly, tell me what it means to be human, but by using it in a way to maybe solve new kinds of problems or to do new things or to learn about things that are already out there, that are already there, that we could maybe spend 10 years learning. Um, maybe we can do that in a year or a few months, and maybe we can learn a lot of things as individuals. And maybe that is something that we can harness to learn ourselves better in a more indirect kind of way, not necessarily in the way, tell me what it means to be human. So I see that as a good potential for good potential use for AI. Yeah, remains to
So
be how you structure that.
So is it possible, and Mike is furthering his question to to ask if AI is being fed from information from our past, and our past um, the so let me just read what he said instead of trying to translate it. He says, I believe some of the early AI systems were taken down when results came out very racially biased. Given that these systems learn from a checkered past, how can AI be better than our past?
So one way is just for humans to come in the middle and tell the AI, hey, these examples of conversation, these examples of outputs, these are bad. Don't do this. And they will have to manually train the AI model that certain classes of responses are bad.
But
Um,
but as with defining morality and defining creativity,
right?
we need to define what's bad, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So,
And who
so
decides that?
Well, right.
Yeah.
So you could maybe, um, I mean, right now it doesn't exist, but you could go ask AI image generators to make any kinds of images you want. And some people might find some kinds of images objectionable or some kinds of text objectionable, which could be just fine with some others. This is in the middle. We're not talking about extreme ideas. We're talking about ideas in the middle. And this is where we draw that fine line. That's going to be a huge challenge. Right now, what they're doing is making sure that the extreme ideas they're left out, and that's for good reason. And yes, you can do that, but really, it requires human intervention. It requires us to say, well, responses like these are bad. Understand these. So these different kinds of responses, and these are bad. Don't talk like this again. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think we are out of time. I'm sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions. We did our best, and this is such a huge topic for everyone. And Raj, I appreciate you trying to make it understandable for us and to shed some light on it for us. I think I appreciate you doing that. I don't know. I'm a little I hesitate to be overly enthusiastic about AI, but you did give us a positive spin on it. So
Oh, I did. Okay, good.
well, you did when you talked about, where it could go, and I'm gonna focus on that.
Yeah. I mean, that's the best we can do.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you everyone for coming this evening. Thank you, Raj, for sharing your wisdom with us. And I will say good night to everyone. Good night.